What if there was one single sprint mistake that's hurting almost every single athlete that you could fix right now? In this video, I'm going to talk about what that mistake is, how you can fix it, and what benefits you can expect to see in a very short time after you do. But first, I'm going to talk about my experience with this mistake. I have made this mistake countless times in my own training. I did it right when I first started out with training in 7th grade, doing cross country for the first time in my life and not understanding why my legs were constantly in pain. Then I made it as I started freshman year track and got my first instances of Achilles tendonitis. Made it again my sophomore year of high school when I injured my Achilles so badly I could barely walk for about a month. Then again my senior year of high school when I injured my foot so badly that I missed the last couple meets of my senior cross country year and barely made it back in time to train for track. I made it again my freshman year of college when I got shin splints for the first time in my life and ended up straining my quad, which took me out of almost my entire outdoor season. And then I finally started figuring it out my sophomore year of college as I transitioned from being a middle distance runner to a sprinter and started seeing massive improvements in my athleticism over a very short period of time. But yet again, I didn't learn my lesson well enough, and I was battling a bunch of different injuries, including some really bad knee pain, nearly chronic hip flexor issues, and was just kind of broken and beaten down for the majority of the year. Finally, most recently, on my journey to run a sub 48 second 400, I made the mistake again because I got really excited about a new training program and ended up again giving myself Achilles tendonitis or tendinopathy, whichever one you want to call it. So all summed up, doing this gave me terrible ankle pain, knee pain, moderate to severe tendonitis multiple times, jumpers/runner's knee, dysfunctional hips, and altogether took me out of probably years of accumulated training volume that I would have had if I'd gotten this right. Part of this was from coaches who I loved but didn't necessarily know what they were doing, and part of it was my own mistake once I started coaching myself because I got too excited about experimenting with new things and wanting to see results quickly. So at this point, you're probably wondering, what exactly is this big mistake that has caused you so many problems? And it's essentially doing too much too fast. You can look at that from the standard of volume, as in scaling up to do too much total too fast. And you can also look at that from the perspective of intensity, which is doing things that are too intense too fast. When you scale both volume and intensity too fast, that's where some very serious issues can pop up, and it's much more likely that you're going to get hurt or just completely wear yourself down significantly faster. The reason this is so bad for your health and wellness as an athlete is that different structures in your body adapt at different paces. For example, most of you probably know that if you start lifting or do a new exercise in the gym that you're not used to, that you get really sore for a few days, maybe even a week after you do it. However, even just the second time you do it, you get significantly less sore, and it just goes downward from there. And a lot of the time, once you're an experienced lifter, you won't even get sore from doing lifts anymore unless you do a lot more than you're used to. That's because generally speaking, your muscles recover and adapt really quickly, but that's not the case for all of the structures in your body. Some of your connective tissues, like your tendons, for example, adapt at a much slower rate than muscles, partly as a result of the fact that they don't get as much blood flow, and so they're not getting the nutrients they need and not always getting the stimulation they need to adapt. So if your training is set up incorrectly and you have big spikes in volume or intensity, even if you get sore, that muscular soreness will go away after a few days, and it's easy to start thinking that you're fine and you can keep pushing through the hard workouts. However, if your muscles are getting really sore, there's a pretty good chance that your tendons are also getting pretty sore and beaten up, and you don't feel those as much until there's a serious issue happening. That leads people to think they're okay and to keep pushing through things while breaking down structures without even knowing that they're doing it. On top of that, even if you pull back and look at things from a more holistic view instead of trying to separate muscles and tendons, your whole body can only adapt so fast to training. And so if you do a lot or you do stuff that's too intense that you're not used to too quickly, there's just no way that your body can keep up with those changes. Well, there's not no way, but it's not super likely, and it's a high risk factor. If you look at the research, a lot of serious injuries, especially ones that are season ending or worse, come as a result of doing too much too fast. In fact, that's the cause of pretty much every injury that's not a freak injury where you step wrong and twist your ankle, or someone lands on your leg and does something bad to your knee, or you take a bad step coming around a curve. Pretty much any injury other than that is going to be an overuse injury, which comes, again, from doing too much too fast. This is also bad for your performance. People who need to produce very high outputs, like sprinters, really struggle to do so unless they're in a state of freshness. Over the course of years, you can build yourself up to the point where you can handle a lot of work at a very high intensity and still produce high outputs while you're doing it, which is where you'll get some of the crazy sort of high volume workouts that you see from high level athletes, and they can do it safely and still perform well. However, if you haven't taken the years to safely build yourself up to it, then as you're doing more and more work quickly, you'll often struggle to adapt to it in time, and so you'll just be layering yourself deeper and deeper into a state of fatigue, and your performance will continually get worse. That's not to say that all fatigue is bad and you should always avoid fatigue at all cost. Fatigue is very useful for athletes, and you always have to experience some type of fatigue, or else you won't be able to adapt. However, especially early on in your training career, being under fatigue is again going to reduce your outputs, and so it's going to be a lot harder to adapt to sprint faster than your current fastest possible speed, because you're not even going to be stressing yourself to the max limit of your speed ability. So doing too much too fast, or too intense things too fast, is going to significantly increase your risk of injury, and it's going to decrease how fast you can improve your performance over time. So what are the best ways to avoid this problem or fix it if you've fallen into the trap? One of the first things you can look at is things like metric trackers. So things that are going to look at your heart rate variability overnight, like a Whoop band, or Apple Watches might do that, or like I have, a Coros Pace Watch. Your heart rate variability is a good short-term indicator of the state of your body and nervous system. A high heart rate variability means you're likely quite well rested and not overly fatigued, and are probably ready to perform at a high level, while a low heart rate variability indicates high systemic stress and says that in the short term, it may not be a great idea to try to perform at a high intensity. I know not everyone will have access to these devices, and their readings might not always be accurate anyway, so some other things you could look at are your mood and your levels of energy throughout the day. I notice pretty often that if I wake up and I just don't feel good and I'm tired throughout the day and irritable and grumpy, that I'll end up checking my heart rate variability later on, and I'll see that it's significantly lower than usual. So even if you can't check your heart rate variability, you can pay attention to your mood and your energy levels, and those will give you a pretty good indication of where you are. And if you have a day where you just don't feel good and you don't have energy and you're irritable and grumpy, it's probably not a good idea to go try to sprint at a high level or do super intense lifting. That's not to say you can never do it, and that's not to say you should always just give in to your feelings, but I'm not describing a day where you're feeling kind of lazy and just don't want to go work out. I'm describing a day where you can't think, you have brain fog, you're exhausted and feel like you can barely keep your eyes open. Those are two very different circumstances. So basically this comes down to the basic advice of just listening to your body. Another thing you can look at, like I talked about earlier, is muscle soreness. You're often not going to feel if your tendons are sore, because that's not really something that happens unless you've already done damage to the tendon and are putting yourself in a pretty bad spot. And if your muscles get super sore after a workout, it's pretty likely that your tendons are beaten up, and you might want to take a couple days off until your muscles feel better, and then your tendons may be doing better at that point. A great way to tell if you've done too much in a workout is if you wake up the next day and you feel like you can barely move, and every muscle in your entire body is sore, and you're stiff like you just aged 20 years overnight. In that case, you probably did way too much, and you want to wait multiple days, if not a whole week, before your next intense workout. But if you wake up the next day and you can tell you worked out, you're a tiny bit tired, a tiny bit sore, you're probably in a great spot to go ahead and take that day easy and then work out the next day, or whatever your normal routine is. So aim for barely sore, barely tired, not absolutely destroyed. This is something that we talked about a lot in my recent podcast with Cody Bidlow from Athlete X. If your muscles or tendons are not recovered, there's no point in going out and trying to do a max speed sprint session, because you're not going to get the results out of it that you want to. There are some exceptions to this, like sometimes later in the year, you might want to do 2 really hard sprint days in a row to simulate going through rounds in a competition. But for most of the year, and most of the time, the point of sprinting is to bring about speed adaptations, and you're probably not going to get great speed adaptations if you go into your sprint session beaten down and are therefore unable to run your fastest. Another thing to think about is that healthy is fast. People are really big on the grind mindset and doing as much as you can and working hard every single day. And I love the idea. It's a cool idea, but it just doesn't translate to good performance. I experienced this early this year when I got all excited about a new coach's training philosophies and wanted to try them out. I put them into full effect and scaled up way too quickly. And I honestly did get great results over a short period of time. I ran my fastest ever top speed and was throwing down times I was really happy with in things like 300-meter reps. But it was way too much too fast, and my tendons paid the price, and I'm still dealing with those tendon issues months later. If you can lean to the side of doing too little and staying very healthy, you're going to put yourself in a much better place for long-term speed development. This is something that Tony Holler got right with the Feed the Cats sprint training program. I think there's a lot of things he didn't necessarily hit the nail on the head with, but the general philosophy that you want your athletes to be healthy and happy and do the minimum viable doses of different types of training instead of doing the most that they can handle and breaking them down is a great training philosophy that I think everyone can learn from. A really simple way to look at this is the 5% rule. I learned this from Paul Favorites, who's a high-level NBA coach, and he suggests that you start with a low volume of training and increase it by only 5% or less every single week in volume. So this is kind of a weird example, but if you do 100 minutes of training the first week, you can just do 105 minutes of training the next week. And over the course of a few months, you will have doubled how much work you can handle, but done it at a slow and sustainable pace so that your whole system could keep up with those changes and you could stay healthy while still having high-level outputs in your training. Now, there's kind of a caveat to this, and it's that increasing your volume and increasing your intensity are both risks to your health, and sprinting is something that actually intensifies itself even if you're not doing something to increase the intensity or the volume. So if I do 10-meter flies one week and I'm running at 10 meters per second, but then I do 10-meter flies the next week and I'm running at 11 meters per second, even if I do the exact same amount at the same effort, because I ran faster the second week, my intensity shot up significantly. Because of that, it's not always a great idea to just linearly increase your sprint distances because your intensities are going up at the same time. And so during periods of time where you're getting faster quickly, it might be smart to just hold your volumes the same and keep doing that until you stop seeing improvements and then start scaling everything up again. If you get all of this right, you can avoid the issues that I keep running into where you're blowing up different body parts, getting tons of pain, and consistently feeling tired and beaten down. You can feel fresh and healthy all year round while still running fast and destroying all your goals. If you found this video helpful, and if you want to listen to 2.5 hours straight of great tactical sprinting advices from one of the best coaches in the game, Cody Bidlow, check out my podcast with him here. I got a ton of value from it, and I think you will too.